Late at night, just as I was about to get up and go to the bathroom, my mother appeared behind me like a ghost and clamped her hand tightly over my mouth. "Sweetheart, don't move. There's someone in the house." Chapter 1. I jolted awake. In the stillness of the night, my mother pulled me close, holding me tightly against her chest. Her breath brushed lightly against my neck, sending a wave of goosebumps across my skin. I listened carefully. There it was, a faint rustling sound coming from the living room. It sounded like someone carefully opening drawers, searching for something. I remembered that drawer clearly. There was nothing valuable inside. Only a newly bought kitchen knife. Something was wrong. My heart skipped a beat. My father was away at the construction site. Earlier that day, my mother had been watching the news and saw a report about a home invasion where the victim had been killed for waking up too suddenly. She had once told me, back when I was 4. "If we ever run into a burglar, we'll pretend we're asleep. Once they leave, we'll call the police." I never imagined her words would come true. Footsteps sounded again. They came closer and closer, until they seemed to stop right outside our bedroom door. The tension made everything worse, and my body reacted before I could stop it. My mother didn't seem to notice. I instinctively curled inward. "Mom, I..." Her hand tightened over my mouth again. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Quiet. Don't make a sound. He's inside the house." She gently pressed my head down, guiding my small body beneath the warm blankets. "No matter what happens, remember what I told you," she murmured. "Close your eyes. Stay silent. Don't make a sound." Then she turned swiftly, reached for the large stuffed toy beside my bed, and pulled it tightly into her arms. At that moment, the door let out a barely audible creak. I knew then that he had entered. Chapter 2. Under the blanket, the air was damp and stifling, mixed with a faint, unmistakable smell. I felt like I couldn't breathe. But my mother's words were firmly etched into my mind. I curled up with my eyes shut tight, afraid to move even a little. Her hand remained pressed firmly on top of my head. I heard the footsteps again, lighter than before, and closer. I counted them silently. 1, 2, 3, 9, 10. When I reached 10, the footsteps stopped. It was a game we used to play every night before my father went to bed. 10 steps was exactly the distance an adult took to walk from the doorway to the bedside. My mother's hand stiffened instantly. Her fingers curled slightly. She had always been timid. Once, when a mouse had gotten into the house, she had held me just like this, her fingers digging into my skin from fear while she forced herself to sound brave. "Don't be scared," she had said. "Mommy will take care of it." Now, I could almost picture it, the man standing by the bed, watching her, her eyelashes trembling despite herself. I wished desperately that I could lift the blanket and discover it was all just a prank, that my father was standing there, smiling. But time dragged on, second by second. My mother's palm was slick with sweat, yet her body felt rigid and cold. Then the footsteps resumed. As if he had finally confirmed something, the man turned and walked away. My mother and I both released a breath we hadn't realized we were holding. Her grip loosened. I felt the urge to lift my head and breathe freely again. Maybe he had realized there was nothing worth stealing and decided to leave. But at that exact moment, my mother's scream tore through the air. The metallic smell of blood hit me. Chapter 3. My mother's body began to convulse violently. Through the blanket, I heard the dull, heavy sounds of impact, again and again. Her mouth seemed to be tightly covered, and the desperate muffled sounds she made grew weaker with each passing moment. But one of her hands was still pressed firmly against my head. Her fingers clamped down like iron, preventing me from moving at all. From beginning to end, she never let go. I already understood what was happening to her. Curled beneath the blanket, I silently called out to her again and again, tears streaming down my face. The man swung the weapon in his hand over and over. He stabbed again and again. Only when my mother finally stopped moving did I hear the man gasp for breath and roar in fury. "It's not my fault. You forced me to do this. You forced me to do this." That voice sounded strangely familiar. But his words felt blocked somehow, distorted and unclear. My consciousness faded, dissolving into overwhelming terror and collapse. When I woke up again, it was already dawn. Adults surrounded me. Police officers. Doctors. And many familiar faces from our town. I looked down at myself, my body covered in blood, though I knew none of it was mine. The looks they gave me were filled with pity and sympathy. Through the haze, I saw my mother standing rigidly by the doorway. Her face was blank. She was silent. My mother was unharmed. Thank goodness. I reached out and softly called, "Mom, hold me." But when she heard my voice, she didn't respond. Her eyes were empty, staring at me as if her soul had already left her body. 2 silent tears slid down her face. Only then did I realize that she was taller than my mother, much younger, her skin smoother and paler. They looked like reflections in a mirror, so similar, yet my mother's eyes had always carried warmth and calm. This woman's brows held pride and stubbornness instead. Her high ponytail and the earrings by her ears stood out like banners of her personality, bold and unmistakable. She wasn't my mother. She was my aunt, my mother's younger sister, only 19. An aunt who loved to laugh, to joke, free and full of life. At that moment, my mother's body was covered with a white sheet and carried away from the scene. They said her injuries were horrific. Her eyes had been left wide open, unable to close. The stuffed toy my aunt had given me for my birthday lay nearby, its stuffing torn out and soaked in blood. It was sealed inside an evidence bag and taken away as well. My aunt finally collapsed. With a dull thud, she dropped to her knees. She stayed that way until the police led her away. After my aunt returned from the police station, the smile never came back to her face. It was as if her soul had left with my mother that night. Chapter 4. After my mother died. My father spent every day with a cigarette between his lips, exhaling clouds of smoke. He coughed every night without stopping. In just a few days, he became gaunt and hollow. A week after my mother died, the killer was finally caught. He was my aunt's boyfriend, the one with dyed hair. Footprints and fingerprints from a third person at the scene matched him perfectly. The police also found blood-stained clothes hidden in his home. The day it happened was during a holiday. My aunt, then a college student, was determined to break up with him. He threatened to jump into the river and kill himself, but my aunt did not waver. He used the same tactic every time they broke up, and she had grown numb to it. With a dark expression, he asked her one question. "Why?" Annoyed, she answered without thinking, "My sister doesn't approve. If you've got the guts, go ask her yourself." Then she turned and walked away without looking back. Behind her, he shouted weakly in rage, "Susan, you'll regret this." She never realized that those careless words would not only bring a fatal disaster upon my mother. They would also condemn her own remaining years to a living hell of endless guilt. My mother had just been buried when my father, without hesitation, paid to send me to a private care facility in town. In that moment, I realized that overnight, I had not only lost my mother, but was about to lose my father as well. With tears streaming down my face, I clung to my father's leg and screamed myself hoarse, but he boarded the bus without even turning back. I chased after the bus, calling out to him with a heart full of pain. For a moment, it almost softened him. His hand on the door rail loosened slowly. But in the end, he pried my fingers away one by one. While chasing after him, I slammed my forehead and raised a swelling the size of half an egg. The head of the facility refused to spend money on medicine for me, claiming that what my father had paid was only enough to keep me alive. He took off his shoe and pressed the foul-smelling sole hard against the swollen spot on my forehead. He said this kind of folk remedy worked best. I screamed and struggled with all my strength, but he grabbed my hair and pressed down even harder. My head was covered in blood, and my voice grew hoarse. Late that night, I developed a high fever. I don't remember what happened after that. I only remember waking up to find myself lying in my mother's arms as she cried. I softly called out, "Mom." Her sobbing only grew more violent. Only then did I realize that she wasn't my mother. She was my aunt. Chapter 5. I opened my eyes and looked around, only to see graves stretching in every direction. My fingernails were packed with dirt mixed with blood, and I was lying in a shallow pit beside my mother's grave. I had no memory at all of how I got there. I didn't remember how such a small child had escaped from the care facility, crossed the night, passed through the forest, and found my mother's grave with such precision. My aunt was crying and trembling as she said, "Sweetheart, let's go home. Auntie will take you home." I shook my head. My mother was gone, so where could home possibly be? But my aunt insisted on carrying me back. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "Auntie will give you a home." Her frame was so slender, like a sharp blade that cut straight into the heart, utterly different from my mother's back, which had always been broad and gentle. Only on her solid back did I truly understand that she was not my mother. My mother was gone forever. What I never expected was that my aunt would truly never leave me. She took me to see doctors and took care of my meals and daily needs. Only then did I learn that she had given up college. She had once been the only top-ranked university student our town had ever produced. She gave up her dream major and the bright future that came with it. All for a promise to give me a home. That promise lasted 20 full years. My aunt took me back to my mother's house. She announced to everyone that she would raise me. Not long after, a group of relatives suddenly showed up, trying to reclaim the house. My aunt held a sickle in her hand, rage flashing in her eyes as she warned them not to take another step. "This is my sister's house," she said. "What right do you have to take it back?" The relatives I used to call uncles and aunts all changed expression. "Your sister?" One of them sneered. "You still dare mention your sister? Wasn't she killed because of you? Didn't you send that dyed-hair guy to her? You think you can use the dead to pressure us? Why don't you go ask your sister at her grave if she's willing to answer you?" The murderous fury in my aunt's eyes vanished the moment she heard my mother's name. She loosened her grip on the sickle. With a heavy clang, it fell to the ground. She allowed them to shove her out of the house while she held me tightly in her arms, my body shaking uncontrollably against her. From that day on, she held me close and survived on the only 400 yuan she had, moving from job to job. After dropping out, she had nothing more than a high school education. She herself had only just reached adulthood. Our grandparents had died early. Raised by my mother, she had no idea how cruel life could be. Even so, she endured it. With no place left for us in the town, she took me to the city. We stayed in a cheap inn near the train station where one night cost less than a meal, a fragile shelter from the wind, and we also spent nights on the benches of fast food restaurants where no one chased us away. She worked as a server in restaurants but was turned down because she had to bring me with her. She applied for jobs at small companies, and despite her good looks, she was rejected again and again because she needed to bring a child to work. She worked at construction sites where people mocked her for being a woman, but under the tin sheds she could lock me inside while she worked, leaving me to play in the dirt. With her thin body, she carried heavy bags of cement and stood her ground against bare-chested men. That night, I saw the skin on her shoulder rubbed raw, bright red flesh exposed, yet she didn't shed a single tear. Later, she saved enough money to buy a second-hand three-wheeled motorcycle and began selling boxed meals at construction sites with me. She cut off her long hair, bought me a soft little bed, and slept herself on wooden planks. Her fingers grew rougher, her voice louder, and her skin steadily darkened. She could endure endless hardship, but she never allowed anyone to owe her a single cent. People thought she was tough, always expressionless, obsessed with money. Only in front of me did she ever show her rare tenderness. After that, I was sent to a kindergarten in the city, then elementary school, and then middle school. Over the years, countless people pursued my aunt, but no matter how many tried to persuade her, she remained single. She always said to wait a little longer, until I finished high school, until I went to college. And so she waited 20 years, from when I was 4 until I was 24. That year, I brought the man I loved to meet her. The next day, my 39-year-old aunt used her life savings to buy me a fully renovated 2-bedroom apartment as a wedding gift. By then, I was already capable of taking care of her, and I couldn't bear to watch her give everything she had for me once again. She spoke softly, "Girls need a shelter of their own, a home they can always return to. When you have your own home, even if I leave this world, I can go see her with pride." It was the first time she had mentioned my mother since her death. On the night of my 24th birthday, I received the property deed. That night, my aunt held my mother's portrait tightly and cried uncontrollably in the new home. 20 years passed in the blink of an eye, and once again I witnessed my aunt's tears. I understood that in the moment she finally broke down, she had at last forgiven the 19-year-old version of herself who had once spoken carelessly. Chapter 6. At that time, my aunt and I both believed that the rest of our lives would finally be peaceful and good. I would spend my life repaying her, taking care of her, protecting her. Just as she had done for me, silently, for 20 years. All the suffering was finally behind us. But on that same night, someone once again slipped silently into our new home. Just like the nightmare night 20 years ago. I heard the sound and got up, pushing open my aunt's bedroom door. My mother's portrait lay shattered across the floor. My aunt was covered in blood, clinging tightly to the intruder's leg. Blood bubbled at her lips as she still cried out, "Sweetheart, run, run." But I no longer had the strength to run. At the moment my hand touched the door handle. A kitchen knife stabbed mercilessly into my back. So this was what it felt like when a blade pierced the body. In that instant, I thought of my mother again. Through pain and despair, I turned my head. I saw that ferocious, twisted face, filled with hatred. He laughed wildly while crying at the same time. "Retribution, this is all your retribution." When I opened my eyes again, everything around me was pitch black. I felt a strong urge to urinate and instinctively shifted my body. A hand suddenly clamped tightly over my mouth from behind. "Sweetheart, don't move, there's a thief in the house." Tears burst from my eyes instantly. It was the voice I had longed for day and night for 20 years. "Mom." In my mother's embrace, warm like spring sunlight, the faint scent of jasmine drifted gently around me. With my small, childish hands, I softly touched her face. Tears fell uncontrollably, like pearls slipping from a broken string. My mother felt the wetness on my cheeks. She must have thought I was trembling from fear. Suppressing her voice, she whispered, "Don't cry, sweetheart, Mommy will protect you. If the burglar comes in, we must pretend we're asleep, don't make a sound, don't move." I snapped awake in an instant. This wasn't a dream. All the memories flooded back at once. Oh God, I had been given another chance. I had been reborn. Reborn to a time before my mother's death. My mother was still alive. My aunt was still alive too. Everything could still be changed. I suddenly sat up, only to be yanked back by my mother, her face pale with fear. She pressed me down tightly, forcing calm into her trembling voice. "Sweetheart, be good, don't move, don't you remember what the news said?" Only then did I realize that right now, I was nothing more than a 4-year-old child. Barely 20 pounds, fragile like a thin sprout. My mother could restrain me easily with just one hand. Outside the door, the footsteps that had been coming and going suddenly stopped. He had stopped even earlier than I remembered. This was bad. Very bad. He must have noticed something. My whole body burned with panic. "Mom, listen to me, the person outside isn't a thief, he's my aunt's boyfriend with the dyed hair, he's here to kill you." Under the dim night light, I saw my mother freeze for a split second. Her expression clearly said, "What nonsense is this child talking about?" There was no time left to explain. While she was distracted, I twisted free and scrambled up. My body was small, but it was agile. I lunged toward the door without thinking. The moment the handle turned, I swiftly locked the bedroom door. My mother was so startled by my sudden movement that her hand froze in midair. Outside the door, there was complete silence. Beads of sweat slid slowly down my neck. I pressed my body tightly against the door and counted the passing seconds. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Silence. Back then, we kept the phone in the living room at night. If I could reach it, we could call for help. People believed mobile phones gave off harmful radiation, so my mother always left the house phone in the living room at night. If I could reach the phone, I could call for help. Had he already left? Then why was it still so quiet, without the slightest sound? I pressed my ear against the door, listening with all my strength. But I heard nothing at all. Only silence. I lay flat on the floor and peeked through the crack beneath the door. A pair of black leather shoes stood there, motionless, like a statue. This vicious man stood just centimeters away, separated from me by a single wooden door. I almost cried out. Please go away, please let us go. I swear, this is all a misunderstanding. There was still no response. I pressed my ear against the door again, holding my breath. And then, the very next second, a violent bang. The tip of a knife stabbed straight through the door like a venomous snake, stopping right in front of my nose. Chapter 7. My mother finally couldn't hold it in any longer and screamed. She rushed forward and pulled my limp body into her arms. My pants were already soaked through. Cornered by despair, my mother erupted with terrifying courage and roared at the door. Please leave, I promise I won't call the police. But if you dare hurt my daughter, I'll fight you to the death. If you touch my daughter, I'll fight you with everything I have. The man pulled the kitchen knife back out. The blade scraped against the wood, letting out a shrill, piercing screech. My mother and I screamed again. Then everything fell silent once more. The quiet outside the door was unbearable. It felt like a century had passed. I thought I heard a low, heavy sigh. Then the man finally seemed to decide to leave, and footsteps sounded again. This time, they grew farther and farther away until they disappeared completely. My mother and I held our breath, frozen like statues, listening intently for any movement. We heard the front door in the living room slowly open and then gently close. Still, neither of us dared to move. Only when the gate in the yard closed softly did we finally let out a breath. Sweetheart, has he really gone? I lay flat on the floor and checked again, confirming that there was nothing in sight. The boyfriend had obtained a letter of forgiveness from my father through financial compensation, allowing him to escape the death penalty. 20 years later, the first thing he did after being released from prison was to come looking for my aunt and me to settle old scores. A man like that, lurking in the dark like a ghost, was chilling beyond words. How could we not call the police? Mom, where did you put the house phone? My mother's earlier outburst seemed to have drained all her strength, and she was still in a daze. At my question, she snapped back to herself. On the TV stand in the living room. She pressed a hand to her chest and forced a faint smile onto her pale face. Sweetheart, why do I feel like you suddenly became so grown up, even braver than your mom? I paused and looked back at her. Moonlight poured through the window, draping her in a soft white veil. Hot tears surged in my eyes like a rising tide. Mom, it's so good to see you again. Before the words had even faded, I rushed to open the door and ran toward the living room. Mom, you call the police, I'll lock all the doors and windows. She froze for a second, then quickly stood up and walked out of the room. At the moment she dialed the number. I was standing on my tiptoes, struggling to lock the front door. From the other end of the house phone came a steady, reassuring voice. Hello, emergency services. What's your location? But the look in her eyes suddenly froze. Her pupils dilated uncontrollably with fear. I knew something was terribly wrong behind me. But I didn't even have time to turn around, or to hear what my mother was trying to say. A deafening roar exploded in my ears. I thought I heard the sharp crack of a skull splitting open. My body collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The world overturned in the thunderous noise, until only deep darkness remained. When I opened my eyes again, it felt as if I had crossed time itself and returned to the original course of events. The night of my 24th birthday. Chapter 8. I opened my eyes and caught sight of my aunt sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to me, carefully mashing an apple into puree. A strange, indescribable feeling rose in my chest. Yet the joy of seeing her alive washed over everything else like a tide. I didn't stop to question why her silhouette felt both familiar and faintly unfamiliar. "Auntie!" I called out in surprise. Hearing my voice, she slowly turned around. Only then did I stare in shock. Her face looked more than 10 years older than I remembered. How was that possible? I couldn't help crying out. What I didn't know was that something far more terrifying was quietly waiting for me. Chapter 9. A faint smile appeared on my aunt's face. "Sweetheart, you're awake," she said. "Come, I've mashed the apple already, let me feed you." I tried to struggle upright. But to my horror, I realized that my body wouldn't move at all. I stared at my aunt in disbelief. "Auntie, I can't move. My hands, my legs, I can't move them at all. What's going on? Where's Mom? Where is my mom?" The tired smile on my aunt's face was instantly replaced by sorrow in her eyes. "Sweetheart, are you still groggy from sleep?" she said softly. "Have you forgotten that you're paralyzed? 20 years ago, on the night your mother was killed, your head suffered a severe blow. Your life was saved, but your nerves were damaged, and from then on, only the part above your neck could move. You can only eat soft, liquid foods. All these years, I've worked while taking care of you. Is it because today is your birthday that you miss your mother so much?" The corners of her eyes, like a dried riverbed, were carved with deep lines of time, tears shimmering within them. "I owe you," she said, "and I owe your mother." Unable to restrain her guilt, she slapped herself hard. Those hands, twisted by years of relentless labor, were far rougher and uglier than I remembered. Yet she was only supposed to be 39, still in the prime of her life. The sealed memories flooded back into my mind. Yes, that demon had never truly left. He had hidden behind the door and launched a sudden attack on me. When I woke from unconsciousness, my mother had already been brutally murdered. On the floor, a long trail of blood marked where she had crawled toward me in her final struggle. After the boyfriend was arrested, my aunt gave up her studies and cared for me day and night. I clung to her like a parasite to its host, and she endured every suffering in the world to care for me, a person completely paralyzed. Her back bent, her face aged. She could no longer fight fate with the strength I remembered. She raised me, supported my education every step of the way. She even bought me an apartment when I turned 24. But the place where I now lay was not the renovated 2-bedroom apartment I remembered. It was a rundown rental room, with ceiling plaster that looked ready to fall at any moment and a heavy smell of mold in the air. "Sweetheart, haven't you always loved apples?" my aunt said gently. "I mashed it very finely, you won't choke." She carefully lifted a spoon, ready to feed me. "I also ordered you a cake," she added. "It'll be delivered soon, so eat a little first." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly began to cough violently. Her face was yellow like withered leaves, painfully pale, clearly gravely ill yet still refusing to see a doctor. How could this be? How could it be like this? I shook my head violently and shouted. Even so, my body remained completely still. "No, it can't be. I'm not paralyzed, we were supposed to survive, both of us. Auntie, things weren't supposed to turn out like this, they weren't." The bed creaked under my frantic struggle. My aunt's arms wrapped tightly around my head like a collapsing dam, her voice trembling with sobs. Sweetheart, please don't do this. If you keep this up, you'll take Auntie's life." I could feel her body shaking, as if a blade were cutting through my heart. Gradually, my emotions settled. Just then, the doorbell rang like an uninvited guest. Chapter 10. My aunt loosened her hold on me. She wiped away the tears at the corners of her eyes and forced her voice to sound light. "Sweetheart, it must be your cake." She stood up and walked toward the door. But my gaze remained fixed on the clock on the wall, confusion filling my chest. The old clock clearly displayed today's date and the exact time. A powerful sense of unease rose within me. Everything that had happened felt like a butterfly effect. Because of me, this timeline had already begun to change. So in this version of time, had the boyfriend already been released? My unease turned into panic. I hurriedly called out to my aunt, wanting to ask her. But it was already too late. All I heard was her startled cry. "Ah, it's you." My heart plunged into a bottomless abyss. 20 years had passed in the blink of an eye. The boyfriend was no longer the same as he once was, but even if he were reduced to ashes, my aunt and I would never forget his face. He was wearing an ill-fitting delivery uniform. In an instant, he pulled a hidden cleaver out from beneath the cake and swung it viciously at my aunt. Blood splattered across his face, making him look like a demon from hell. Absurdly, he was crying even as he struck. "Why did you frame me? Why? I lost my mind. Auntie, my aunt." I screamed, slamming my head against the headboard. "Ah, ah, ah." The agony of being unable to fight back was more torturous than death itself. My aunt's gaze froze on me, tears streaming down her face, as she stopped breathing in despair. He grabbed my hair and dragged me to the floor like a broken puppet. Disgust and contempt filled his eyes. As if killing me wasn't even worth the effort. His canvas sneaker came down on my face like a sledgehammer. My eyeball felt as if it were about to be crushed out of its socket, like a gem forced loose. He spat on me with disdain. Then he turned, ready to leave. "No. Don't let me live like this. End my life, end my life." I screamed until my voice tore apart. "You coward. Kill me. Go on, kill me. I'll tell the police everything, just wait for hell." He finally stopped. Like a river frozen solid. He turned around, those hollow black eyes staring straight at me like an abyss. The next second, I felt a chill at my neck. Gurgling sounds followed as blood bubbles rose like a boiling spring. Tears filled my eyes, but I smiled. As I watched his back disappear, my consciousness faded completely. When I opened my eyes again, everything was dark. A hand suddenly clamped tightly over my mouth from behind, like a hunter in the night. "Sweetheart, don't move, there's a thief in the house." I knew then. I had gambled right. Chapter 11. I was back again, returned to the time before my mother's death. I had gambled right. This really was a loop. The pain of death had not yet faded from my body. But my consciousness woke faster than my flesh. I pretended to submit, curling obediently into my mother's embrace. The moment she loosened her grip, I sprang up. Rolling off the other side of the bed, I dodged her reaching hand and ran straight for the bedroom door. Click, click. The instant I locked the door, my palms were slick with sweat. All movement outside stopped abruptly, like a melody cut short. Urine streamed down my legs, soaking my pants and dripping onto the floor. The footsteps outside slowly moved away. Then came the sound of the living room door opening and closing. Then the yard gate. My mother gradually recovered from the shock. She didn't stop to scold my recklessness and made a quick judgment. "He's gone. I'll get the house phone and call the police." I grabbed my mother's hand just as she was about to open the door. "No, he's lying." Like a cunning fox, he was hiding behind the living room door, waiting for us to walk straight into the trap. Chapter 12. My mother looked at me, her brow knitting slightly. "Sweetheart, how do you know?" I held her hand tightly. "Mom, I'll explain everything when the time is right, but right now you have to believe me." She slowly relaxed her furrowed brow and studied me with a deep, searching gaze. After hesitating for a moment, she finally asked, "Then what should we do now?" I recalled the moment the blade had slashed through the crack in the door. Even if we never stepped outside, how long could this door really protect us? Were we doomed to be trapped in this hellish dead end? No. Impossible. The fact that I could come back here at all was a miracle. There had to be a way to break this cycle. But for the moment, I couldn't think of a solution. All we could do was buy time. I stared at the fragile bedroom door, clenched my teeth, and spoke two firm words. Hold the line. The furniture in the bedroom was sparse. I looked around. There was only a wardrobe, a bed, a dressing table, 2 red desk lamps, and a few scattered items. If we were going to buy time, the first priority was to make it harder for him to break in. We had to use every movable heavy object to block the door. My mother understood instantly. Together, we began pushing the wardrobe, trying to wedge it firmly against the door. The wardrobe was packed with quilts and clothes and was extremely heavy. Before long, my mother's clothes were soaked through with sweat. Damn it! My body was far too weak right now, and the help I could offer was painfully limited. Just as frustration rose in me, we heard a sound outside again. But unexpectedly, it wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from the yard. What was happening? Chapter 13. A fierce argument erupted in the yard. There was a man's voice and a woman's voice. That voice made the blood in my veins boil. It was my aunt. Why had she suddenly appeared here? Why was she here at all? What unknown change had caused the course of events to turn? Wait. Who was she arguing with? The heat in my body froze instantly like winter frost. It was that bloodthirsty killer. The boyfriend. My aunt was in danger. They were in the yard, which meant the living room should be temporarily safe. I shouted urgently, "Mom, call the police, now." I shoved the bedroom door open and sprinted toward the yard. My mother reacted immediately. Okay. She rushed toward the TV stand. I charged into the yard, grabbed the sickle by the door, and ran forward. I saw my aunt and the boyfriend locked in a violent struggle. The kitchen knife had been flung far away. My aunt's ponytail whipped through the air as she straddled his back, beating him until his face was swollen and bruised. But what made no sense was that the boyfriend seemed unable to fight back at all. His eyes were nothing like the vicious criminal I remembered from 20 years later. They were clear. And stupid. He wailed, "Susan, I was wrong, please spare me." My aunt turned and saw me, surprise flashing across her face. "Sweetheart, get Auntie a rope, quick." "Spare you," she spat. "You're going to prison." Seeing my aunt again, I almost burst into tears. But when I looked down at the boyfriend lying on the ground, my blood ran cold. He was wearing a pair of army green canvas shoes. Then whose leather shoes had I seen through the crack in the door? There was someone else in the living room. Mom. Chapter 14. When I ran back into the living room and called out again and again, there was no response. My hands trembling, I turned on the living room light. I froze in horror. There was a gaping hole in my mother's throat, and she had already collapsed in a pool of blood. She hadn't even had time to cry out for help. On the other end of the line, the operator's voice was still going. "Hello, ma'am, are you still there? Hello?" The open window let in a cutting, icy wind. I couldn't take it anymore and collapsed onto the floor. Everything had clearly changed. We had the phone. We had caught the boyfriend. So why was I still unable to save you? Was I destined to become the orphan who lost her mother? Destined to keep dragging down the aunt I loved? Destined to struggle through a life like hell? Mom. I knelt beside her, hollow and lost, my soul nowhere to be found. Only when that shout rang out did I slowly turn my head like a machine. I saw my aunt's face twisted in terror, and beside her, the boyfriend bound tight like a twisted rope, staring in shock. Then I pulled out the dagger and plunged it into my own chest without hesitation. Pain. It was unbearable. My whole body trembled as tears poured out like a broken dam. So this was it. Hurting yourself was the most painful thing of all. My aunt crawled and ran toward me at the same time, but it was already too late. She held me, disbelief written across her face, crying until her voice broke. I reached up and touched her face. I wanted so badly to tell her. Auntie, see. None of this is your fault. Stop punishing yourself. If I fail, if I'm gone, you have to take good care of yourself. The way you wear your hair in a ponytail. It's really beautiful. My aunt couldn't accept what she was seeing and collapsed, screaming into the phone. Help, please help my baby. Heaven, open your eyes, why is it still like this? Why did I come back and still couldn't save them? I clutched my aunt's clothes tightly, unwilling to let go. What had she just said? What did she mean by, I came back and still couldn't save them? Did that mean this time, my aunt had also been reborn? Was this the variable I had never known about? Struggling, I leaned close to her ear and spoke my final words in broken breaths. Her expression changed the moment I finished. Then I let the darkness swallow my consciousness completely. I could no longer resist. I fell once more into that silent abyss. When I opened my eyes again, my mother's voice rang in my ears once more. Sweetheart, don't move, there's someone in the house. Chapter 15. Okay. I remained completely still, like a statue. Like a kitten clinging to warmth, I curled into my mother's arms and greedily breathed in the faint jasmine scent on her body. Perhaps she sensed the tears at the corners of my eyes. She buried her head deep into the bedding and said in a suppressed voice. Sweetheart, don't be afraid, Mommy will protect you. I nodded gently and curled up obediently. Sweetheart, later we'll pretend to be asleep. If the thief sees there's nothing valuable in the house, he'll leave. Whatever happens, we must not let him know we're awake. My mother's voice suddenly tensed. Close your eyes, he's here. The footsteps stopped abruptly outside the bedroom door. The door creaked softly as it was pushed open. The man suppressed his breathing and quietly stepped into the bedroom. My eyelashes trembled uncontrollably. In my heart, I counted along with his footsteps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With every number, it felt as though a piece of flesh was being cut from my heart. When it happened, I had been far too young. Everyone said my aunt had caused my mother's death. Everyone said the boyfriend was the killer. I had never doubted that version either. But all these years, one question had remained, lurking in my heart like an unextinguished spark. Like walking through the dark, unable to find where it could burn. 6, 7, 8. Why? Why exactly? Why did he sign a letter asking the court for leniency, as the victim's family member? Why, after leaving, did he never return for 20 years? 9. At the moment I silently counted to 10, a flash of silver cut through the air. I opened my eyes. I stared at the man in front of me. My throat tightened and tears poured out like a spring. I called out that word. Dad. Chapter 16. Dad, you're back, I missed you so much. My childish voice tried to awaken the last trace of conscience in him. Dad, the people you want to hurt are your wife and your child. The man froze. The gloved hand hung in the air like a bird suspended mid-flight. He wore a black cap and a tightly sealed jacket, his face covered by a thick mask. Only his eyes, visible through the gap, revealed a flicker of hesitation. I could feel my mother's body trembling slightly. She opened her eyes. Her gaze also fell upon those eyes, deep as the night. She screamed. Ah! Husband, you. The father's hand, after that brief hesitation, still stabbed downward. I flipped over instantly, like a mother beast protecting her cub, throwing myself over my mother and squeezing my eyes shut in despair. The air filled with the smell of blood. Yet the searing pain I expected never came. I couldn't help but turn my head and saw my mother gripping the blade tightly with her bare hand. Blood dripped onto my body like scorching sparks, filling me with terror. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Mom. Immediately after, I heard the sound of the blade scraping against bone as it was pulled out. Perhaps because of this series of unexpected events, my father's movements visibly slowed. My mother stared at him like a mad woman, the hatred in her eyes overwhelming the shock. "Husband, have you lost your mind? You want to kill me. You want to kill our daughter." In that moment, the strength she unleashed stunned me. She pushed me behind her. That blood-soaked hand grabbed the bedside lamp and smashed it viciously toward my father's head. My father staggered backward after being hit. I quickly turned on the ceiling light. The bedroom was instantly flooded with brightness. It illuminated my mother's deathly pale face, her eyes sharp like a she-wolf's. And on the floor, the mask my father had been torn off. My mother stared at the man on the ground in disbelief. The man she had loved for years, shared her life with, and entrusted her entire future to. Then she asked the same question I had. Why? Why, tell me why. Chapter 17. My father stopped pretending and began laughing to himself, like someone who had completely given up. Blood flowed down from his head along his cheeks, forming thick red streaks. He laughed and cried at the same time. That expression was more terrifying than any demon. He staggered to his feet like a drunk. "You can't blame me, you're the ones who forced me into a dead end. You forced me into a dead end. I have nowhere left to go. I had no other choice. Everyone wants to drive me to death." What exactly had happened to my father? What kind of catastrophe had he gone through? As soon as his words fell, he lunged at my mother like a wild beast. I grabbed the other desk lamp, trying to imitate my mother. But my father kicked me straight off the bed. "You little bastard, I'll deal with you later." Clutching my chest in agony, I curled up like a shrimp. The world spun violently, and I vomited blood with a choking cry. My mother used both hands to desperately hold back my father's knife handle. A hoarse, desperate scream tore from her throat. "Nyen nyen." I watched as my mother's arms were slowly forced downward. I knew in my heart that we were trapped in a dead end. Chapter 18. Bang. At that very moment, I heard the sound of the door being kicked open. A tall, thin figure lunged in like a leopard. Before my father could react, a sickle slashed down hard onto his body. My father let out a scream like a slaughtered pig. The blade jammed into bone. Only the wooden handle remained. My mother seized the chance and snatched the fruit knife from my father's hand. With a sickle buried in his back, my father howled in pain while still trying to fend off my aunt's blows. In that moment, I seemed to see the days when my aunt took me to construction sites. She would swing a full sack of cement onto her shoulder. One of her legs nearly buckled under the weight, while the shirtless men burst into laughter. Her eyes red, teeth clenched, she forced herself back upright. A top university student who had dropped out, learning to curse for the first time in her life. The ferocity in her eyes was something I would never forget. But no matter how fierce my aunt was, my father's body was still that of a man hardened by years on construction sites. He clamped his hands around my aunt's throat. He cursed her viciously, calling her a filthy bitch. Like a predator, he snatched the stick back and began smashing it toward my aunt's head in a storm of blows. Yet his stick seemed destined never to fall again. His body suddenly stiffened, frozen like a statue. I noticed a strange expression spread across his face as he reached up and touched his neck. There, a knife was embedded like a deadly serpent. He turned around and saw my mother standing behind him, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling like a withered leaf in the wind. Then he collapsed to the ground like a massive mountain falling apart. Thud. As if the sky itself had shattered. Chapter 19. At that moment, police sirens tore through the night like lightning, shrill and urgent. We pushed the door open. The police moved swiftly, surrounding the courtyard like hunting leopards. My mother and my aunt were taken into a police car, while I was gently lifted into an ambulance. I caught sight of the boyfriend, who was caught climbing the wall with a fruit knife on him, screaming in pain. From the previous loop, I already knew that the boyfriend was not the true killer of my mother. When I saw his shoes, the doubt that had lurked in my heart for 20 years began to grow wildly like weeds. That was why, when I realized my aunt had also been reborn, the last words I whispered into her ear were, "Be careful of my dad." Before getting into the police car, my aunt gently stroked my head, tears sliding down her face. Thank goodness this time everything is still in time. Chapter 20. Later, as the police investigation went deeper, both my mother and my aunt were ruled to have acted in self-defense. Because my father had been committing attempted murder at the time, it did not even qualify as excessive self-defense. My mother took me and moved to the city where my aunt had gone to university, leaving behind that sorrow-filled town. She took nothing from the house, as if cutting off the past entirely. As the investigation continued, the doubts in my heart were gradually answered. Everything pieced itself together with the fragments of memory I carried. At last, the truth hidden within that night was fully revealed. Our family had never been well off. It was only after my father became a contractor that our finances gradually improved. Immersed in the sea of wealth, my father began craving the thrill of dangerous reefs. That desire turned him into prey, and he eventually fell into a carefully laid trap. He lost the 300,000 yuan in year-end wages owed to his workers, the result of a year of sweat and the hope they depended on to survive the new year. Imagining a crowd of relatives and dozens of workers surrounding him at year's end, demanding either their wages or his life, my father collapsed under the pressure. He did not even dare to tell my mother the truth. Seeking comfort in alcohol, he instead witnessed the fierce argument between my aunt and the boyfriend. After my aunt stormed off, the boyfriend really did go to a nearby supermarket and buy the exact same fruit knife that had been missing from the drawer days earlier. He lingered outside the supermarket, unable to find the courage to step into our home. My father waited until nightfall, already convinced that the boyfriend did not have the nerve. At that moment, an evil thought crept into his heart like a ghost in the dark. He remembered the life insurance my mother had purchased for the family, and wondered what would happen if others believed the boyfriend was responsible. I believe he must also have remembered my mother's gentleness and my childhood. He must have remembered our family sitting around the dinner table, sharing warm and ordinary happiness. Perhaps the thought itself frightened him. But that very night, debt collection calls rang again like whispers from a demon. At last, he made his decision and put on the mask and gloves he carried with him. If he had known that murder was not covered by insurance, I wonder how he would have felt. I wonder if he would have regretted trading his conscience for a moment of peace, striking a bargain with the devil. After he left, the unsuspecting boyfriend climbed over the wall, only to see the blood-soaked scene and panic. He held my mother, trying to save her, and ended up covered in blood himself. So what, in the end, is evil, and what is good? My father took the compensation money, moved to another place, and lived quietly for 20 years as a so-called good man. The man who tried to cross a moral boundary and commit wrongdoing paid for a single, misguided moment with 20 years of his life. No one was willing to believe him. Fed by the poison of resentment, he grew into something like a demon, trapped in the darkness, crying out to the heavens again and again in despair. Why frame me, why?